The public schools were closed Friday morning, and public gatherings of every nature have been forbidden. Strangers are reluctant to visit the city and also are not welcomed, for it is felt in some quarters that the epidemic was brought to Grangeville by persons from outside points who unknowingly were suffering from the disease. Hello there, welcome to Headlines and Voices. This is where we read articles from publications from across the United States from a century or more ago. And some of these things are so fascinating. And one of the reasons that we put this channel together was because it was inspired by a book I wrote a while ago called Virus 1918. And basically what it is it's a book that has a lot of newspaper articles that we recreated that were from the Spanish influenza. A lot of people now, because of COVID, find it really interesting. So there were so many articles that we didn't include in that book, and also just other articles on interesting things that we find through our research. We wanted to make this channel to share these with you. And so the article that I have for you right now is another one related to the Spanish influenza. And this is not one that was in the book, but it's still so interesting to look at how these people were handling a pandemic basically 100 years ago. This particular article is from October 24th, 1918, and this was in the worst of the pandemic of the Spanish influenza. And it's from the Idaho County Free Press in Grangeville, Idaho Territory. So October 24th, 1918. This article's title is "Epidemic is Believed to Have Reached Crest. Red Cross aides in many cases, Dr. Scallon ill." And then there's a subhead here that says, "Physician in bed with cold due to constant work day and night. Business at standstill." So here's the article. 2 deaths from Spanish influenza and more than 50 cases constitutes a summary of the situation in Grangeville and vicinity. Those who have died are Mrs. Lucy Busher of Chicago, who was here to attend the funeral of her mother, Mrs. Mary Arnold. John S. Yates, 16-year-old son of Mr. and Mrs. Lee Yates, residing a mile northwest of Grangeville. It's worth noting here that one of the things that made the Spanish influenza so absolutely frightening was that there was no rhyme or reason to who it affected. Where COVID today, we can really, you can say that if you're over a certain age, you're more likely to have it impact you or cause death. And once you get below a certain age, the impact is completely different. This Spanish influenza was not like that at all. It was almost random in who it would hit and who would die from it. Dr. G.S. Stockton, county health officer, Thursday morning declared 50 cases to be a conservative estimate of the number in and near Grangeville. He declared, however, that the situation is satisfactory and that few new cases are developing. He believes the epidemic has reached its crest. Dr. P.J. Scallon, fatigued by calls that have been answered day and night, was in bed all day Thursday with a cold which borders on influenza. He was ill earlier in the week but had partially recovered and for 2 days had resumed his practice when he was obliged to again take to his bed. So just another interesting note right there. When this person was saying that he believed it was near its crest, it actually really was. There wasn't much left after this. It went on for another month and a half or so before it really started dying down. So it was at its worst right here when this article was written. So here's another subhead. Business quiet in Grangeville. Business in Grangeville has been practically at a standstill since Monday. Few persons are on the streets. Those who appear in the business section of the city are there for business only, and immediately their business is transacted, return to their homes. Customary night crowds are not in evidence. Crowds no longer gather about the post office and await distribution of the evening mail. The post office lobby has been so strongly disinfected that no one can long remain therein. Gauze masks are worn by many employees of business houses in the city to prevent contraction of the contagion. Masks were first used Saturday evening on recommendation of Mayor Edmondson as a precaution. Frank McGrain, manager of the Alexander Friedenrich department store, announced that the masks would be distributed free to all applicants, and many were given out. Masks are worn in the stores and on the streets. Saturday night, more than half the persons who were on the streets wore the gauze masks about the nose and mouth. And then another subhead, big trade for drugstores. The lull in business circles of the city is such as has never before been experienced in the annals of Grangeville. The drugstores, however, are having an unprecedented trade, selling large quantities of all kinds of disinfectants and preventatives to be used to disinfect residences and business establishments, and as gargles by persons who feel that they may have been exposed to the contagion and contracted the germ. Floyd Swank, printer of the Grangeville Globe, was the first person in Grangeville to come down with the disease. He was taken ill last week. At first, his case was not thought to be Spanish influenza, but later it was diagnosed as such. He has recovered. Mayor T.E. Edmondson, who Saturday afternoon issued to the public a request that as a precautionary measure, everyone wear a gauze mask. Does that sound familiar? It's exactly the same stuff that's happening right now. Was himself stricken with Spanish influenza on Sunday. His daughter, Genevieve, a high school pupil, was the first member of the family to be taken ill, and her case was followed by every member of the Edmondson family coming down with the contagion. Their cases were pronounced as not serious. I.E. Zuver, auctioneer, is said to have had the disease in a mild form. He was at home all day Wednesday. And there's another subhead here, laundrymen are stricken. Mr. and Mrs. Madison Myers both were stricken with the disease. Mr. Myers, who is one of the proprietors of the Electric Laundry, was taken ill Friday after he had handled laundry work from Nez Perce, where the epidemic claimed a number of lives. Mrs. Myers was stricken the day following. Mr. Myers' condition for a time was considered serious, but the crisis was reached Sunday night, and he now is said to be on the road to recovery. Charles Smith, the other proprietor of one of the things that's so interesting about these newspapers, and I actually mentioned this in my book, is how often they have misspellings. And I stopped here because I just wanted to point this out. You can't see it, but the word is electric, but it's spelled Leectric. So they flipped the E and the L at the beginning of the sentence. And once again, they didn't have the same kind of standards that we have today and the same quality control measures that we have. And so you go into these articles, these newspapers, and they're just filled with mistakes like this. So sometimes it gets a little challenging reading these things because they weren't printed really clearly, or the words are misspelled and the wrong. Anyway, so Charles Smith, the other proprietor of the Electric Laundry, also was taken ill on Friday. Because both proprietors of the laundry were bedfast, Charles R. Campbell, landlord of the Imperial Hotel, took charge of the Electric Laundry in order that laundry work for the hotel might be turned out. Mr. and Mrs. Pearl Wright are ill with the disease. Mr. Wright was taken ill on Monday and Mrs. Wright the day following. Mr. Wright is associated with the Wright Grocery Company. George Willie, also a member of the firm, is ill. Public schools are shut. The public schools were closed Friday morning, and public gatherings of every nature have been forbidden. Strangers are reluctant to visit the city and also are not welcomed, for it is felt in some quarters that the epidemic was brought to Grangeville by persons from outside points who unknowingly were suffering from the disease. Grangeville physicians have since Friday been busy day and night caring for patients and have worked to almost the point of utter exhaustion. Dr. P.J. Scallon contracted the disease early in the week. He had the contagion in a mild form, and although not fully recovered on Tuesday, was about his business calling on the afflicted. Mr. and Mrs. Walter McAdams are among those who early came down with the epidemic. Mr. McAdams was taken ill Saturday, and Monday, Mrs. McAdams became ill. Mr. McAdams had planned on leaving Sunday morning for Spokane to enlist in the tank service of the U.S. Army. So a couple of things interesting here. you'll notice that they just keep listing off all these people. It's fascinating because these newspapers would just be listing the names of private citizens who were sick. Today we're so concerned about our privacy, and we have all these social networks that are just kind of handing our privacy out all the time. Well, they were in newspapers just going out and listing people's names. There were some newspapers that we researched for the book that I put out where they would list the people's names and their address in the newspaper, which just was absolutely fascinating to me. So that's the first thing. The second thing, you see that he, Mourning for Spokane to a list in the tank service. What many people don't realize is that the Spanish influenza happened near the tail end of World War I. And that's partly what caused the Spanish influenza, they believe, to come into the United States. It was these troops returning home from Europe. And they brought this with them. And that's where it got the name Spanish, because they believe it came from Spain as a result of that war. And so you see this reference to somebody going to enlist in the tank service, and it's because this was all during that same time. So then the next subhead, more coffins are ordered. Anticipating a possible large number of deaths, such as occurred in Nez Perce, and found the city without coffins, Undertaker A.J. Mogg on Tuesday wired for an additional supply of coffins. Extraordinary precaution is being taken everywhere in and around Grangeville to prevent spread of Spanish influenza, and it is believed the high point of the epidemic has been reached. Much good work has been done by the Grangeville branch of the American Red Cross in combating the epidemic. Nurses have been provided for homes in which 2 or more members of the family are ill, and hospital supplies have been furnished. Many Grangeville women have volunteered as nurses. The Grangeville Hospital, which has not been in use for several months, is being fitted up as an isolation hospital for persons suffering from influenza. It is believed that if patients can be removed to the hospital, the cases can be better treated than in the separate homes. Grangeville has not quarantined cases of Spanish influenza. In Boise, a strict quarantine is enforced on all cases. L.F. Zimmerman of Kuskia was the first Idaho County resident to die of Spanish influenza. Mr. Zimmerman succumbed on Tuesday of last week in his home in Kuskia. He is believed to have contracted the disease while at work in Nez Perce. He was a concrete brick manufacturer. And then this subhead here, influenza in county jail. 2 prisoners in the county jail have been stricken with the malady. R.W. Bignell, nonpartisan league organizer, and Howard Bullard are the prisoners who are ill. Sheriff Leif Yates has Spanish influenza, as has night jailer John Byram. W.E. Reed, Republican nominee for sheriff, is reported critically ill of pneumonia at his home in Whitebeard. That's kind of an interesting thing, too, to realize that when the Spanish influenza happened, it wasn't often the Spanish influenza that killed you, it was pneumonia. The Spanish influenza would damage your lungs, and pneumonia would set in, and then that's ultimately what would kill you. Ms. Dorothy Baker, local operator for the Western Union Telegraph Company, is ill. The telegraph office on Wednesday was closed, and physicians declare Ms. Barker will be unable to return to her duties for a week or more. And that is the end of that article. Anyway, fascinating stuff, and really interesting to see those references to masks and shutdowns and things, to see that how little has changed. Our approach to these issues is kind of the same as it was 100 years ago. It hasn't really improved all that much. So anyway, if you enjoy these kinds of things, we ask you to like this video and, of course, follow our channel. And just want you to know that these videos that we do on this channel are sponsored by Audio Mover. Audio Mover is the company that takes your old audio and videotapes and converts them into digital, so you have a permanent archive. And if you go to audiomover.com, you can start your order there. And if you when you get to checkout, type in the word headlines, and you'll get 15% discount on your order. So once again, that's audiomover.com. And we'll leave a link in the description down below. Anyway, thanks for listening. Headlines and Voices is sponsored by Audio Mover, the company that takes your history, your old audio and videotapes, and converts them into digital. Visit audiomover.com to learn more. Headlines and Voices is a production of Thick and Mystic Media. Visit thickandmystic.com.